In this session, we're going to talk about building a youth ministry foundation. This idea of laying a foundation is essential for health, not only in our spiritual lives. Off to the side of your notes, you might even reference Matthew 7, where Jesus talks about building a house on a sand versus building a house on a healthy foundation. If you don't build a healthy foundation in youth ministry, you're going to be in trouble. And Jim mentioned that there are two reasons that people don't last. The first reason was personally. They just don't make it. They burn out, they flame out, they can't control their lives, they don't have any balance. The second reason is people don't know what they're doing. And in our time together, what I want to do is I want to walk you through 7 building blocks that I think are essentials for a healthy youth ministry. Now, there may be many more. I don't know. I'm going to go after 7. And you'll notice that I use the word health and not the word growth. To be honest with you, I'm not that concerned about growing a youth ministry. What I am concerned about is having a healthy youth ministry, and healthy things will grow. If my children are healthy, I don't have to say to them, hey kids, grow. They're just going to grow as a result of health. And numerical growth is not the primary goal of a youth ministry. As a matter of fact, I hope that you don't come to something like this and just ask people, how many kids do you have in your group? That's not an indicator of health. If you ask me, hey Doug, how's your life? How are you doing? How's your family? I wouldn't answer by saying 5. Okay, I just wouldn't do that to describe my family. I'm much more concerned about health. See, when growth is your main motive, if your motive here is I just want to grow my group, if it's your main motive, you're going to take your eyes off what is essential. And that's the foundation, that's the fundamentals. In your notes, there's just a real simple quote by Vince Lombardi, but I like it. Those of you that know the scriptures, this is in Malachi. It says, when you get away from the fundamentals, you've got a long way toward defeat. I really believe one of the reasons most youth ministries don't last and why youth ministers flame out in a short period of time is because they haven't mastered the fundamentals. They haven't mastered the essential foundation blocks. So I'm going to go through 7. And we'll kind of unpack these a little bit. The first is this. A healthy youth ministry needs the determination of a point person who has a calling and or conviction. The question here is, with this point person, this is the leader of the ministry, whether it's you or somebody you work with, is who is going to care more than anybody else for the ministry. There is nobody at Saddleback Church that cares more about the student ministry than me. Not even my pastor. As a matter of fact, my pastor is a wonderful guy. He would say to me tomorrow, hey Doug, aren't you getting a little too old for that? I need you to preach more. I need more leadership in other areas of our church. Aren't you ready to give that up? This first point is really fun. We're talking about the right leader. This is the one who, when you cut them, they're going to bleed that youth ministry. They're going to care. Throughout the Scriptures, you see that God uses key leaders. Let me ask you a question. Are you that key leader? Are you the right leader? When we started, most of you raised your hands. Not all, but most of you raised your hand saying you were the primary leader, you are the point person of your ministry. My challenge to you is if you are the leader, then lead. Okay? If you're the leader, then lead. One of the major struggles I see in youth ministry today is that the leader doesn't lead. A lot of times, and this is because youth ministry tends to draw younger workers in the church, and a lot of youth workers are young, here's what they say to me. Well, Doug, I'm just, I'm young. I mean, there's some of my volunteers that have been volunteering in ministry longer than I've been alive. I'm only 23 years old. And I grab them by the shoulders, and with as much empathy as I can communicate in my face, I say, are you the leader? Okay? If you're the leader, then lead. Timothy was a young leader. And he was a good leader. I mean, so good that there was 2 books of the Bible named after him. And that's pretty impressive. And listen to Paul's encouragement to Timothy in 1 Timothy 4:12. It says this, don't let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for the believers in speech, in life, in love, in faith, and in purity. Okay? Don't let anybody look down on you because you're young. Lead. Jim left me on my own when I was 23 years old. I was an intern. I started youth ministry in 1979. I volunteered. I was a volunteer small group leader for junior high boys. I did that for 2 years, and then I became a Christian after that. And in 1981, I went to work in the church as an intern with Jim. And after a while, Jim allowed me to run one of the sections of he had a junior high person, a high school person, a college person. He let me be the high school person. And so I got to feel a little bit of leadership. When I was 23 years old, he left. He left to go start what is now currently Homeward. And boy, that's when I had to really step it up. And he said something in a leadership-rich environment in Newport Beach, California, right down the street from where we are. He said, Doug, this church is filled with leaders. People who lead businesses, people who lead professions, people who lead universities. He says, if you don't lead, you're not going to be respected. And he taught me that, and there was just these moments. There was this one guy, his name was Phil. He used to play for the Denver Broncos and the LA Rams when we actually had a team, and he was a big guy, an intimidating guy. And I remember the first time he kind of got in my face about something that happened with one of his kids. I didn't feel it because he could have went, hey, Doug. He could have, the guy was huge. I was like the size of one of his thighs. But you know what? When he confronted me about something, you know what I did? I just took one step up and looked right into his eyes. I mean, I got back into his face because he was wrong. It was just some petty thing that he was used to kind of throwing his weight around, his power around. In that Newport Beach environment, that was kind of the thing to do. And as a young guy, I kind of stepped up and lead. And after I left, I had to change my underwear and stuff like that because I was so scared about that. But I'm telling you, if you are the right person, okay, a healthy youth ministry needs the right leader. If you're the right leader, lead. Now, this is kind of off to the side here. You might write these down somewhere. Let me give you some things a leader needs. First of all, most essential, what a leader needs, is a love relationship with God. As your relationship with God goes, your ministry goes. If you're not deep in your relationship with God, your ministry is not going to be deep. What's going to be happening is you're going to be teaching off of skimming on the surface. This is your most primary relationship. Purpose-driven youth ministry has been translated into dozens of languages. That people have told me that, publishers have told me it's the best-selling youth ministry book of all time. The first chapter in this book is all about relationship with God. That's the foundation of everything. And if you don't get that right, you're just in the entertainment business. You're just entertaining students. And a lot of times we get it backwards. We say, oh man, if I can just get my life together, then I'll be right with God. No, that's not how it works. We get right with God, and then we get our life together. I have a friend, his name is Steve. Actually, we have hired Steve to help us with purpose-driven youth ministry around the country. We hired him. He lives in Texas. As a matter of fact, even now, he has just taken a job to go back into the church to be a youth pastor. But Steve was helping us gather purpose-driven youth workers across the country and identify who they were so that, I just don't want people to feel like they got to come out to Saddleback to visit Mecca, and I got to just get with Doug. And no, there's people doing better youth ministry than me in different parts of the country. I just can't keep track of who they are, so I asked Steve to do that. And I'm in Dallas with him about a year ago, and we're talking. And I said, Steve, I really don't know much about your story. I know you're a good youth worker, and I know you've got a legacy in youth ministry of 15 plus years. I said, tell me about yourself. He said, well, when I was in my early 20s, I had an affair. And I thought, oh, that'd have been nice to know before I hired you. And, maybe I should have asked that question. That was like, Doug. So, and he walked me through this whole deal, and he's not shy about me telling the story. He's written on it, and he's been reconciled, he's been restored, and the whole bit. But he said, the first thing to go was my relationship with God. Because once I didn't have a heart for God, then all these gray areas seemed to be okay. And he kept pointing back, because I said, were there any other signs? Was there people in your life? Did you have accountability? He said, I had everything. I was in a small group. He goes, I just lost my relationship with God. And when God fizzled, then he failed. What a leader needs, a love relationship with God. A second thing you need to write down is what this leader needs is a love for teenagers. Okay? You can't fake this. Students will spot a phony a mile away. Now, key leader, you don't have to spend all your time with students. As a matter of fact, I think that's poor leadership. And some of you disagree with me on that, and that's totally fine. And in another section where we're going to talk about developing a strong student team, I'll tell you that. I think if you're the point person, you're the key leader, most of your time shouldn't be spent with students anyway. It should be spent with leaders, so that leaders are out doing what you want to do with kids. And in many ways, when that leader, Joe, is spending time with 5 students, you're spending time with those students because you've trained Joe. That's how you grow a ministry beyond yourself and your personality. But you got to have a love for kids. I don't have to spend every single day of my life with students, but when I'm in front of them, they have to sense that I care about them and I love them. My leaders have to sense that this is why we're doing this. Long time ago, I realized that I am no longer cool. I have teenagers in my own group now. I have a 16-year-old daughter who drives and reminds me daily that I'm not cool. I have a 13-year-old son who is about as tall as me and can almost beat me in basketball, and that will be a sad day, and I will grieve that, and I'll probably go into counseling, but that day's coming. Yesterday, he had me 5-1, but I came back and beat him 11-6. But it's only because I'm very competitive and I foul harder than him, and we don't have refs in our front yard. But I'm not cool. And once you get to the point where you realize you don't have to be cool to be a good youth worker, you just have to love students. See, students don't care whether I'm cool; they care whether I care. They care whether I'm compassionate or not. They care whether I'm genuine. A third thing a leader needs is a backbone. And a leader needs to be able to, why do you need leader needs a backbone? Because you're going to have whining students. You're going to have complaining parents. You're going to have disgruntled volunteers. You're going to have disappointed church leaders. You're going to have a criticizing world. And if you don't have a backbone where you can't take some of the heat, you probably need to remove yourself from being the leader. Okay, I've got whining students. Right now we're going through some in our ministry where we've got some kids that are saying, we're singing too much, and I've got other kids complaining that we're not singing enough. And this last weekend was the 25th anniversary of Saddleback Church, and we rented out Angel Stadium to celebrate. We haven't had our church all together in one time in years because we have these multiple services, so we rented out Angel Stadium, and we didn't fill it, but we had a ton of people there. It was like a celebration moment. And there was a mom who came up to me and wanted to confront me over a sex message that I'd given a year ago. Okay? And here we are, I've been there 13 years, and I'm having the time of my life celebrating our church, and she's got me over in the corner mad at me because I used the word penis and vagina in a sex message. Okay. Now, I'm not exactly sure what else I was supposed to use. I know a lot of slang for both, and I thought I should probably use the appropriate terms, all right? But you know what? And so here a parent happens to now see me, and all of a sudden she's had this agenda building up for a year, and she went after me. Disgruntled volunteers that our curriculum is too hard to use or too easy to use or whatever it is. Disappointed church leaders. I've just made a change in the church where I kind of oversee some of the stuff that's happened on the weekend, and I got rid of our old school roaring into the 80s church bulletin and just made it so that it's not just this swap meet announcement thing. And, one of the church leadership, one of the guys in pastoral care is now ticked off because people don't know when the support groups are going to be, and our attendance went from here to here, and just all the whining that's going on. Hey, that's part of being in leadership. You gotta have a backbone. Here's one of the things that I've realized: about 10 to 20%, if you're the key leader, 10 to 20%, let's go to the high end, 20% of people will not like you. Okay? 20%, let's just go 20% of the people are not going to like you. Okay, that's 2 out of 10. Now, you times that by the size of your church, whatever it might be, and you start thinking that. And when I step in front behind a music stand with a microphone, even in a crowd like this, there's a percentage that isn't going to like you for whatever reason. Well, if you play to the whining minority, you miss out on the ministry to the majority. Because there's always going to be people that aren't like you for some reason. And it's usually a stupid reason. I gave an illustration in my church about, I was talking about sometimes you want things to get better, but they just don't get better. And I gave this illustration about going to the movies with my wife, and we went to see the movie Chicago. I don't know if you ever saw the movie Chicago. It was a dance music, it was a date night, and my wife wanted to see the, people not kill each other. And so we went to see Chicago, the dance movie. And I was telling the story about how I'm in that, and I am wishing during that movie, as I'm sitting there, that someone would come into the movie and beat me. So it would give me an excuse to actually leave the movie, all right? And I said, you did. My point was, sometimes things don't get better. The movie didn't get better, and, waste time and all that. Well, it wasn't the lady at Anaheim Stadium who didn't like me using penis and vagina. It was another lady who wrote me this letter that she couldn't believe that my wife actually enjoyed the movie Chicago and took the time to write it. Folks, there are insane people in your church, okay? And you are the target of their insanity. And there's this little machine called email where they get direct access to you now. They don't even have to write it out, put a stamp on it, send it, wait. Now it's just, I'm mad, let me, and there it is, right there. And some of you are on email all the time. You leave the church office and you go home, and it only took you 10 minutes to drive home, but what do you do when you get home? You're sick. Yeah, that you know what I'm talking about. Check the email. Got to check the email. Email is that guy at the front door just going like this. Hey, here I am. Hey, I know you're there. I used a red exclamation mark, so I got to the front of the line. You're inside. You better return my email. I don't like the movies you watch. Hey! You with me? All right? You're going to get criticized. You got to be the right leader. You are the right leader. You got to have a backbone. Okay? Now, I would love to say that those letters don't bother me anymore. At 25 years working in the church, they bother me. As a matter of fact, I have an assistant, and I said, any mail, you read it. Okay? Any mail, go ahead and read it. And you know what? If people take cheap shots, like where I can't control anything, it's not about my character. I mean, if you confront me about something that you see in my character, absolutely, I want to read it. I want to learn from you. I want to have a dialogue about it. But if it comes from Mrs. Anonymous, okay, rip it up. I don't even want to see it. Why? Because I don't want to be thinking about it. Okay? I don't want that to grieve my spirit. So, that kind of stuff still bothers you. But a leader's got to have a backbone, or you're not going to last in ministry. A fourth thing a leader needs is determination. Okay. Is youth ministry easy? No. You want an easy job, be a senior pastor. All right? A little bit of counseling, a lot of golf, budget, things like that, expense accounts, when I'm with my pastors, you know what, yeah, the church will pay for that. Really? How come I don't got that budget? But, it's not easy. You're pouring your life into a kid. You think you're discipling her, and then 3 days later on a Friday night, she's getting stoned. You go, well, what? We were just praying. What? Youth ministry is not easy. Really, you want easy, get out of youth ministry. As a matter of fact, do this. Turn to your tables. I want you to take 3 minutes for the whole table. Okay, 3 minutes for the whole table. I want you to share the most difficult experience you've had in youth ministry in the last 12 months. And you can only have 30 seconds to share it, okay? And that would give us 6 people. So if you're at a table with 7, one of you goes mute, all right? Those of you who sit in the rows, pull together. Okay, 3 minutes. Ready, go. The most difficult experience you've had in the last 12 months. All right. Let me ask you this. How many of you, raise your hand if you're depressed right now? You're depressed right now, all right. How many of you have a little bit of hope right now? Okay, why do you have hope? Yours isn't as bad as theirs, that's right. Okay, you're not alone in this. And a lot of times in ministry, I can't tell you, I'd have these conflicts or these failures, or, my leadership kids out, having sex, or, on our leadership retreats, stuff like that. And I'm going, man, am I the only one that's going through this? Until I began to meet and talk with other youth workers and realize that I'm not alone. Why is it helpful to know this? Because pain is right around the corner. I mean, you might sit there in this moment feeling a little prideful, going, oh, man, I got it pretty together. I'm in a pretty together church. I feel pretty together. I'm surrounded by pretty together people. That's good. That's good. Just wait, okay? Because it's making its way to your neighborhood, and it's right around the corner. It says in the Scriptures, Hebrews 12, and let us run with endurance. Circle the word endurance. The race that God has set before us. We need determination to last. What else do leaders need? Leaders need leadership skills. If you are a leader, you are a learner. And once you stop learning, you will stop leading. You've got to develop new skills. You learn how to lead people. Let me give you a few that I think you ought to write down. One is confronting. If you can't confront, you're not a leader. If you need help with that, in my book, Your First 2 Years in Youth Ministry, just read that one chapter. That chapter right there will be the price of the book, unless you just rip it out and take it for free. You got to learn that, all right? You got to know how to confront. I just got back from a missions trip, and one of my leaders using just language that it's just not appropriate. He was calling kids. He said, "Oh, Doug, I didn't mean it in a mean way. I didn't mean it like in a real way." But he was like, "Hey, fag," and he's using the word fag, and I'm going, wait a second. Now, in my era growing up, that was a slang word that meant goofball, knucklehead. But it's not what it means, today. You just don't use that word. So what do I need to do? I need to confront him. And then 2 nights later, I heard him calling somebody a douchebag. And I went, okay, well, I got to deal with this again. And that's the pastor's kid. So it's confronting. You have to be, he's like, what? That's not a dirty word. It's not a dirty word. You see it on boxes in the supermarket. I'm like, don't try to justify. You're an idiot, okay? Write down this word, the word coaching. A leader is a coach. A leader is somebody who sees what's not happening. I know you can do that. And get them to that point. As a matter of fact, even a subset of coaching in my notes is empowerment. How do you get the most from others? I really believe that people want to succeed in ministry. A lot of times they just don't know how to get there. Jim gave an illustration of him sitting down with me and helping me communicate. He coached me. He mentored me. I remember reading this dumb book. I remember this. He had just moved into this condo. There was no furniture there, and I think that's why we met, because we would always meet, now that I think about it, around his chores, because I helped him move in furniture and did his work for him. But I remember, Jim, I don't know if you remember this. There was this book that you had me read, and it was like, The Red Frog, and it was all these words that were like frog and goof, and it had these. Probably should have thought through this illustration a little better, because I can't remember the words now. But I remember standing there feeling so dopey, reading this book to him because he was trying to help me pronunciate. But what was he doing? He was coaching me. He knew that, hey, you're going into youth ministry. You're probably going to teach 2 or 3 times a week. You need to learn how to speak. We as leaders, we need to help coach people, get the most from others. A key leadership skill that I want you to write down, that you have to learn. I don't care if it doesn't come naturally to you, figure it out. It's encouragement. Encouragement is a leadership skill. Okay? Encouragement builds people up. You're a leader, you want people who are they're gonna fight a battle with you. Because that's what youth ministry is. It's a battle. And we're going to war every single week, if not every single day, and I don't want to go into war alone. And one of the leadership skills is to get other people that want to go to war with you. Well, the only way people want to go to war with you is if you encourage them. You notice what they're doing well. I recently said to one of our leaders at our church in another department outside of youth ministry, I said to him, did you thank anybody for going above and beyond? It was related to this 25th anniversary thing where these people gave above and beyond. I said, did you thank them? He goes, oh, no, they know I'm thankful. I said, no, you need to tell them. You need to look them in the eyes and appreciate them. And if that doesn't come easy to you, I understand. You need to figure out how to put encouragement in your arsenal if you are a leader. And leadership skills, we could go on and on about that, but let's move on. A sixth thing a leader needs to learn is an honest evaluation of strengths and weaknesses. An honest evaluation of strengths and weaknesses. Here is the truth. Every single one of us is a bundle of strengths and weaknesses. We all have strengths and we all have weaknesses. If you feel like, oh, I can't think of any strengths, I have all weaknesses, that's false humility. If you think you have all strengths, that you're good at everything, that's pride. And an over-exaggeration or an underappreciation of how God has wired you, it could lead to some serious implications in building a God-honoring youth ministry. An honest evaluation of strengths and weaknesses. Do this right now, just in your notes. You don't need to share it with anybody. I just want you to write somewhere on your paper, write down 3 strengths. Okay? 3 strengths that you have. If you feel awkward with people looking next to you, initial them, write it in Greek, Pig Latin, whatever. And right next to that, write down 3 weaknesses. Just by show of hands, how many have an easier time writing down weaknesses than strengths? Just out of curiosity. How about you have an easier time strengths than weaknesses? Okay. How many are afraid to answer because you think I'll make some comment about it? Okay. Yeah, a leader needs to be brutally honest, have an acknowledgement of what their spiritual gifts are and what their strengths and weaknesses are and what their talents and skills are. Why? Because it helps you with focus. Okay? That if I don't know my weaknesses, then I can't surround myself with other people who have strengths to make my weaknesses seem irrelevant. That's my job as the leader. My job isn't to be good at everything or to be strong at everything. My job is, if I'm going to lead something, I need to surround myself with people who have strengths that make my weaknesses seem irrelevant. For example, I am not a very strong administrator. All right? Like Jim said, I can administrate, but it doesn't come easy to me. I have to work hard at it. A weakness is overcommitment, and I commit to too many things. I need people in my life that will help me to say no. And it's easy to stand up and say, okay, we got to say no. And Jim and I know this because we journey through life together. It's easy for us to tell you that. It's difficult to say that. So what I need people in my life that will help me say no. I not only give my schedule, I'll veto power to my wife. I have a small group of people that help me say yes or no to speaking requests. Because we get this sheet of speaking requests, and I want to say yes to everything. But every time I say yes to something, I'm saying what to something else? No, exactly. Okay? So, that's a weakness in mine. I have a weakness as a leader. I have unrealistic expectations of people. I think people, how hard can that be? Get it done. I could do that. And so I place the expectations I have of myself on other people, and I have to battle that. That's not a good skill of a leader, and I need to know my weaknesses so I can lead. See, God has made you to be you. He hasn't made you to be anybody else. I have a feeling that when we get to heaven, God's not going to say, hey, why weren't you more like Jim Burns? Why weren't you more like so-and-so? Sometimes I feel like when I play that comparison game, I always lose, and so do you, because we compare what we know about ourselves to what we don't know about other people. First time I took a group of kids to hear a guy named Ken Davis speak, who used to, he's a fabulous communicator, probably one of the best I've ever heard. We're walking away from this convention center, and I'm walking with a couple kids to the church van, and there was a couple knuckleheads behind us, and I heard one of them go, oh, you're so much better than Doug. I don't know whether he said it so I could hear it. I mean, one, it was truth, so it was okay, but it was just one of those things where I would always compare myself. I heard Ken Davis, who's a fabulous communicator, I heard him speak 10 years later. Guess what he did? The exact same message. You know why he was good? Because he'd given it 4 million times. And he ought to be good at that. Well, I'm coming up with new material every week, as are you, because we're in the trenches. I can't keep giving the same talk. So now what am I doing? I'm comparing what I know about myself. I'm not that good because I got to do 3 messages a week, to what I don't know about that other person who's given that same talk 4 million times. So not to live in the shadow of other people. Folks, let me tell you something. Everyone and everything looks better from a distance. Everyone and everything looks better from a distance, including me and the ministry that I'm involved in. You might read about it in a book. You might go, oh, that Saddleback. Why don't you just come close for a little bit? And all of a sudden you go, oh, you struggle with that? Oh, you suck at that too? Actually, I shouldn't say that. I should say, my mom's here, so I should say the word sip. You sip at that also? So be who God has made you to be. The challenge I give to you as a leader, as you evaluate being the right leader, is make some leadership commitments. What I would call ministry and character commitments. That you make a list of what those commitments are, and then you keep them in front of you. Commitments are kind of like a rudder that guides your time and your thought and your leadership. This is the type of leader I want to be. Make a list of what you're going to commit to and then keep it in front of you. You don't have to publish it. I gave you an example in your notebook of one that I put in your first 2 years in youth ministry. I basically at the beginning said, hey, if you're just starting out, you ought to make these leadership commitments. I'm not telling you to make these. I just want to give you an example of what these commitments are. An example of that. All right, 7 essentials. We've just talked about one. The first essential is the point person who has a calling or a sense of conviction. Who's going to care more than anything else? The second essential is a clarification of needs. What are the needs the ministry will attempt to meet? This is an essential. Okay? This is a foundation. You must take time to figure this out, or else you're going to be left with advanced adolescent care. Okay? What are the needs? Why do we even have a youth ministry? See, here's what a lot of people do. Most of you raised your hand, said you're employed by the church. Here's what a lot of people do. They apply for a job, they go to the church, they settle in, they go, they run a Wednesday night Bible study, they have a Sunday school, they have a once-a-month leader training, they have a mission potluck every 3rd month, and they just start going and doing the events as opposed to stopping and even asking this question, why does this church want a youth ministry? As a matter of fact, that's one of the first questions you ought to be asking before you even go to a church. Why do you want one? What, do you want a youth ministry to keep kids out of trouble? To help tithing parents with their parenting? To teach the Bible to the next generation? To provide a place where students can serve and teach? Do you have a youth ministry because other churches have one? Because we've always done it this way? What are the needs? Why have a youth ministry? And by the way, this has to be answered in the heart of the point person. Because if it's not answered in your heart, guess what? You're going to get the needs of somebody else. You're going to get the needs of Mrs. Montgomery who says, just take care of the church kids. Okay? Teach the Bible. Have a Bible drill class. You need to know, why am I in youth ministry? Because I believe that teenagers are not the future of the church. They are the church. And it's not an empowering praise for leaders and senior pastors to say, young people, you are the future of the church. You know what that says to my 13-year-old son? Wait till you're an adult to take Christ serious. Okay? He's not the future of the church. He is the church. Jesus didn't say, pick up your cross and follow me when you're 25. Okay? So why am I in youth ministry? Because I believe that is the greatest place to be in the church. If I felt like there could be any more strategic place in the church, that's where I would be. Okay? It's not, when's Doug going to grow up and be a senior pastor? Adults are easy to speak to. And if you can get a 12-year-old turned on to Jesus if you can help a 14-year-old see that his life could be totally different if he allowed Jesus Christ to invade it, that's exciting to me. That person has the potential to change the world. You might write some of these things down. You can see them on the screen. Who are the target audiences? What are the church needs? What is the need of the church? What are the family and parent needs? The parents that call this home. What are the needs that families have? What are the students' needs? What do they have? Social needs, emotional needs, spiritual needs? And what are the needs of the volunteers? You have to answer that question or your volunteers are going to leave. If you just recruit volunteers to meet the needs of everybody else and their needs aren't met, you're going to be doing youth ministry by yourself. And you become brutally honest in the identification of the needs so you'll have something to aim for. I grew up in a youth ministry where my youth pastor, I thought, until this morning, I was very disappointed. I thought this was his phrase, and so I'm a little wounded about this. Nothing therapy can't handle. But, when Jim Burns' favorite quote was, "He or she who aims at nothing gets there every time." If you don't know what the needs are, what are you doing in youth ministry? Okay, this is an essential building block. You just kind of run around and take care of kids. Because once you have a determination of what the needs are, you're one step closer to a workable strategy to meet those needs. And that the strategy is another foundation. But before we get to that, I want to make sure you don't do youth ministry alone. Go to page 11. A third ingredient, a third essential, is a plan for developing leaders and ministers. A plan. Circle the word plan. And in another session, I'm going to talk about how do you develop a student team. But this is who is going to provide the leadership and shepherding in this ministry. Here's what you need a plan for. You need a plan for developing leaders. You need a plan for developing shepherds. You need a plan for developing some one-on-one mentors. You need a plan for finding some people who are just going to be encouraging to the ministry. And like I said, I'm going to do a whole session later, but let's say you're taking this pass-it-on material and you're only given an hour and 15-minute shot, and this is the talk you're going to give. You have to at least acknowledge this. I'm not going to go into it in a ton of depth because I'll do that tomorrow morning, but if you're given this one talk, you have to put a little bit of time into helping people understand leadership, or in some ways, if you're not making this an essential, you're wounding their ministry. So what are some questions to ask? You might look to the screen. What kind of adults do we want? That's a key question. What kind of adults do we want in the ministry? There's this lady at my church. She came up to me and she said, yeah, I'd like to work with kids. And I thought one of my friends was setting her up, but this lady shaves her eyebrows. And she had this little mascara deal. I mean, shaved. Like, you could tell they were shaved because they were coming in prickly. And she had a little mascara line above it. And I'm doing everything I can not to crack up. And I'm going, oh, you want to work with kids? And I'm making great eye contact because I was contacting the whole, region up here. And it was just very hard to take her serious. And what kind of adult? Not that I wouldn't ever allow somebody that doesn't have eyebrows to work with kids, but I just made me think about what kind of adults do we want in the back of my mind? Not her. But that was a little aside. But a second question to ask is, how will we create an adult team? How are we going to create this team? Because it's not just going to happen. I mean, we can't say, oh, boy, I'd really like some adults. And they're going to all of a sudden show up and go, oh, I'd really like to work with kids that won't pay attention to me. That's not going to happen. You have to have a plan. How will adults be honored and valued? It's very important to ask that question, because if they're not honored and valued, they're going to be short-term. And a fourth question to ask is, how will the adults be trained? Now, let's go to that first question. I'm just going to give you an example of this, and we're not going to camp on here for very long, but what kind of adults do we want? This is a very important foundational question, folks. Do you want shepherds or chaperones? Okay. I want shepherds. A youth ministry that has chaperones, and I'm not trying to offend anybody if that's the terminology that you use in your church. If you use the word chaperones, wonderful. But to me, a chaperone feels like a parent who was forced to show up to a school dance because they're going to their kid got in trouble or something like that. Chaperones are the ones that kind of do this in the back of the room. They've got the spiritual gift of Gestapo. They're just kind of making sure nobody throws a chair through the window or messes up. They snap a lot, they point, that's one, that type of thing. Where a shepherd isn't standing in the back like this. A shepherd is sitting on the ground with students. A shepherd is having conversations. Well, folks, that is a foundational question. If a key foundation is developing leaders and ministers, we've got to ask that question, what kind of adults do we want? Well, we want shepherds. Or maybe you do want chaperones for some events. And that's maybe more of an entry level, and it's folks, we just need you to hand out the pizza at this event, and it's quarterly or something like that. And maybe there's pros and cons of each, but you've got to figure that out, because your answer to these questions will drive the kind of adult that you are looking for. And by the way, you might write this off to the side, and I'd love for you to prove me wrong on this one. You never stop, okay? You never stop looking. I've been in one church for 11 years. The church I'm at now, I'm pushing my 13th year. You never stop. You never get to the point where you go, whew, ha, ha, we've arrived. We got enough great adults. Because if they really are great adults, what are they doing? They're discipling kids. If a kid is being discipled, what is he or she doing? Reaching out. And now they're reaching out to their friends, bringing their friends into church. Their friends are finding Christ. What do you need? More adults, okay? You just can't go idle on this one. I will tell you this, it does get easier the longer you're in a church. It does get easier. Why? Because you're trusted, okay? Some of you have been in church for just a couple of years. Whether you wear a name tag or not, you wear the badge youth minister at your church. They know who you are. You're new. You walk through the church hall, people won't even make eye contact with you because they're afraid you're going to try to recruit them to be a Sunday school leader, okay? So, you're like, they're diving in bushes, leaving church early, stuff like that, double tithing so they don't have to get involved, whatever it is. But the longer you're at a church, the better off you'll be. Let's look at the fourth foundation. Fourth foundation that I want to talk about is a confident vision. What is the big picture for this ministry? Now, let me make a statement that is controversial. Some of you will not agree with this, and this is totally okay. I think this is, people debate me over this all the time. My personal opinion is vision is overrated. Okay? I just think vision is totally overrated. That a leader has to be a visionary. And I'm not saying that because I'm not. As a matter of fact, I think I have good vision. I think I can see big picture. But I hear all this stuff about how leaders must be visionaries and you got to see the future and all that. And what it feels like it does to me is it kind of wounds people. People go, oh, that's not me. I really can't see past Tuesday. And they just don't get involved in leadership. There's something about vision that, one, I think vision can be collective. That I can sit with 4 or 5 other people on my leadership team and together we can come up with vision. It doesn't have to come from one person. Now, it can be, secondly, it can be individual. There might be an individual who has vision and knows where we're going to go, and we're going to take that campus, and we're going to reach the community, and we're going to help families, and that person might be a visionary. But it doesn't mean that's the only type of leadership. Just a youth ministry needs vision. Your senior pastor may be a visionary. Well, that's great. You can pull off his or her vision. Okay? I just think it's overrated. It doesn't have to, sometimes people feel guilty. I just don't have that big of a vision. Vision can be collective. It can be provided by somebody else. What I want to know here is, where are we going? Why does this youth ministry exist? What's the direction this train is headed on? That's an illustration I use in my ministry. I say, hey, gang, I just want you to know, here's the direction the train is headed. If you don't like the direction, don't get on the train, okay? Because we don't need to fight on the train, right? Because we're part of the body of the Christ, and the Scriptures plead us not to be divisive. So here's the direction. You're not trying to move the train. There's other trains going in different directions. Jump on one that you like the direction, but don't jump on this train here, because here's the direction that it's going if you're going to fight with it the whole time, because that's going to be painful for everybody, and Satan would obviously love that. What a vision does is it helps leaders be clear. It helps us see what we're trying to accomplish. Here, this is good, just because it's not in my notes. Helping them try to accomplish and not accomplish. That's what a vision does. What are we about? What are we not about? I think a huge problem is that most youth ministries don't have a clue where they're going or why they exist. And most youth ministries are filled with wonderful people who want to follow a leader who either A, has vision, or B, can follow a vision, can lead from a vision. See, most people in the church are good-natured followers. They really are. 80-90% of the people in the church, they will follow. They just want to know where we're going. They'll follow you. They don't want to necessarily fight you. One of the reasons that you have a lot of fights in your church is because where there is no vision, the people perish. Okay? So they'll follow a vision, but when there is no vision cast, no direction, no why, no where are we going, no why this is why we exist, people all of a sudden they come up with their own pet agendas, and they want to fulfill those pet agendas. In your notebook, there's a little sidebar. It says, according to a Barna poll, approximately 60% of people want leaders who describe a vision for the future and create the plans necessary to implement the vision. They're ready to follow that. And the goal of the vision or the picture or the dream creates some synergy where people, it's motivating, it's spiritually empowering. What I like about vision is that it's bigger than me. It's bigger than you. Okay, that's what vision is, bigger than you. Let me read you one. This is a vision from a student ministry. This would be an example of what I would call a very specific vision. Okay? It says, our vision for student ministry, adults who are totally devoted to knowing, growing, and showing the love of Jesus Christ in their lives, demonstrated in the following ways. Growing in Jesus, involved in a small group, tithing, worshipful heart, serving out of their giftedness, a passion for the church, faithful, fruitful, fulfilled, passion for the lost, compassion for the poor, making life decisions from a foundation of devotion to Jesus. Okay? To me, that's just a very specific vision, and what it was a vision for adults. What I feel more comfortable with, I'm not presenting a right or wrong. I'm just saying what I like more. I like a little more general, big picture vision. My vision is that our youth ministry exists to deepen and fulfill the biblical purposes in the lives of teenagers, families, and the church. Okay? That we want to fulfill and deepen the biblical purposes of evangelism, fellowship, discipleship, ministry, and worship. Put there in your notes a little quote, the process of understanding God's purposes and applying them will slow down the get in there and get some programs going mentality to all of a sudden stop and step back and go, okay, why are we doing what we're doing? That's what vision is. That's what big picture is. Now, I've kind of put these in my mind in a little bit of a sequential order. And you'll notice that we haven't even got to programs yet. We haven't got to strategy yet. In my personal opinion, that's, you know what, programs can change, strategy can change. Well, let's start with the right leader. Let's start with the right volunteers. Let's start with a vision. Let's start with needs before we even get to that. A fifth here, you'll see, is still not strategy or programs. It's an establishment of values. What are the essential ministry values? Now, the values answers the what question. You might write this down. We put it up on the screen. Needs, what we talked about, is the kind of who. Who are we trying to reach? That's needs. Needs is who are we trying to reach. Strategy is how are we going to do it? And values is what is important to us. So needs is the who. Who are we going to reach? Strategy is the how are we going to do it? The values, what is important to us? What is the importance to you as a leader? What's a value that you have? Okay, let me put it this way. If I was to cut you What value would you bleed about youth ministry? Share a couple with me. Talk to me. Okay, so your value is you want to make sure kids have a foundation to stand on when they get out of your youth ministry, okay? What's another value that you have? The value is you want them to know the passionate love of God, okay? The value that they're cared for. Good. What else? Okay, you want them to know that they can be a follower of Christ right now. They don't have to wait till they're an adult. Okay.
Modeling a Christian lifestyle and Christian marriage.
Okay, so you have a value that you want to model a Christian lifestyle and marriage. Okay? Any others you want to say? Okay, so that's a value to you that you can have a peer-to-peer ministry. Okay? I think it's very important for a leader, the point person, to know what his or her values are. You know, I'll give you one that doesn't sound that spiritual. For me, one of my values is laughter. Okay? I want kids to laugh. I want kids to have fun. I know it doesn't sound very spiritual, but I know that one of the best times I ever had at church was when I was laughing and their humor was a value. That God used something that was important to me to reach me. My mom would tell you this. If you come over to our house, it is like a stand-up comedy fest. Okay, there's 5 people in the Fields family. Kathy Fields is the only one who doesn't try to compete with the humor. Everybody else, you know, we just all think we're really, really funny, and that's just part of who we are. My 16-year-old, I think she could be on Saturday Night Live, and might be the only Christian to be there. She's that funny. Every time we're eating, somebody is laughing so hard, milk is shooting through their nose, and that's kind of one of the goals, to say something funny right when somebody's drinking. You know, but that's just who I am. I like laughter. I want a kid to come to church and go, that was fun, that was church. Now, it doesn't mean it's my only value, okay? Because if it was my only value, we'd open up a little, you know, youth comedy club. But that's not the value. There is more values than that. But I want to give you an example of different types of values. What are the values that, in my opinion, you might write down the word non-negotiables. What are the non-negotiables for you as a point person? What are they for your church? What are they for the other people on your team? What do you believe about students? Okay? Like this guy said, one of the things he believes about students is that they're not the future, they're today. What do you believe about God's Word? What do you believe about culture? And then you take those values and you state them in a concise language. This is not a purpose statement, this is a value statement. Okay? This is what is important to us. And you post them in different areas. I'll give you an example. Because when you post them and you know what they are, when you get during difficult times, you're able to go, okay, that's a value, that's a value. Like every August, we have kids in our ministry, we have very simple ministry. It kind of follows the Acts model where it says the believers met in the temple courts and they met house to house. If you were to go to Saddleback Church, that's our whole church. We have a temple courts kind of church gathering, and then we meet in homes. Okay, that's our ministry. It's not that flashy. But in the meeting in homes, in that home is a small group environment. In that home, a kid is going to be known and cared for and loved on, and that's one of the values. My very first values in my ministry, when I first began to think about this, I just made them real simple. A, B, C. I want kids to be accepted, I want them to feel like they belong, and I want them to be cared for. Okay, that was it. That's where I started with that. And so, for example, if those were still the values, when August comes around and we are trying to administrate small groups, so we run our small groups from September to June. We give the summer off. The summer's off so our volunteers can rest, so houses can be recarpeted, so we just have a little bit of a break. But now kids are signing up for small group during the summer. August rolls around. We know small groups are going to start in a month. We are now trying to take this maze of going, okay, she wants to be in a small group with this friend, but this person doesn't want to be with that person, and this person doesn't like that person, this leader doesn't like that kid. And you know what I'm getting at? And you're trying to administrate relationships. Every time this rolls around, I want to quit. Okay? I want to quit and go forget small groups. It's so much easier to just say, Wednesday night, everybody meet at the church, I'll preach at you. Okay? But it's one of our values is intimacy. One of our values is small groups. And those values that keep you centered on what's going on. When you get your teaching notes, you'll see an example. I'm not going to take the time to go through it right now. You'll see an example of the word relationships. Relationships is our primary value at Saddleback in our youth ministry. We're building a youth facility now, which I've never had a youth facility in 25 years working in the church, and we're now going to build a student zone. And the first thing I said when I met with the architects, when you walk in, I want it to just reek of relationships. I want it to be like Starbucks on steroids. I mean, it's just seating areas and couches, and it's just going to communicate relationships. That's going to be our value. And we took the word relationships and created this little lame acronym where each letter, comes up with one of our values: relevant, encouraging, laughter, accepting, transparent, strategic stewards of time, high touch, et cetera, et cetera. You can read that on your own. But to me, you might write this off to the side. Values are fluid. Okay? They're fluid. They're changing. They might change from one year to the next. Hey, this year, you know what? We really need to value growth, or we really need to value intimacy. To me, values are fluid, where a vision or a purpose statement is not as fluid. Okay. There's another example of values, although Jim doesn't call them values in Youth Builders. We put them on your quotes here, or in your notebook. It says, developing a ministry that lasts requires these attributes: acceptance, affirmation. To me, those are examples of values. Let me give you a little aside comment, because I know there's this movement going around right now in leadership on the value of excellence. Okay? And people are writing about it and speaking about it and doing seminars on it. And I personally believe that God deserves our best. But I also believe there's a value, what I would like to call the good enough principle. That if I try to be so excellent on a youth ministry flyer, that I work on that flyer for so long that I stay in the office till 6 o'clock and I just spent 8 hours on a flyer instead of 2 hours on a good enough flyer, and then I could have spent that 6 hours with leaders or students, I was not a good steward of my time. So I understand the value of excellence. I just think there is a good enough principle. When you go for excellence in everything, you feel guilty and you work so diligently to pull it off, you don't have time for people. Okay. Page 12, just two more. A sixth foundation is a workable strategy. And the workable strategy is, now we're getting to the point of programs. How is everything going to be accomplished? Okay? We've taken a look at the needs of kids and needs of the church. We've taken a look at the values, the leadership. Anybody, to be honest, anybody can have vision. But now you got to figure out, how are we going to pull this off? How are we going to do this? And typically, most visions use programs to kind of lead the ministry down the field. Not always, but programs usually help pull off the strategy. Let me give you some ideas about programs. If you write quickly, you can catch up here. Programs should meet needs. They should fulfill a biblical purpose. Again, this is just my opinion, but I think you ought to be able to look at a program and say, does this program fulfill the biblical purpose of evangelism, fellowship, discipleship, ministry, or worship? Okay? Or primary purpose. Programs, third, should be evaluated. Constantly evaluating your programs. Fourth, they should be negotiable. Meaning this, they should not become sacred cows. If some of you are at a church and there's a program and you say, why do we have this program? Well, we've always had it this way, and it's not meeting needs, it's not fulfilling a biblical purpose, then it ought to be blown up. The cow ought to be killed. But it hasn't become negotiable, therefore it's a sacred cow. Program should be changed. Same thing in another word. It should be less important than people. Program should always be led. If you're spending so much time pulling off a program that you're not meeting the people that are coming to that program because you're so busy pulling it off, then something's wrong with the program. It's become more important than people. And programs should have goals. They should have measurable goals. An example of goals is one that I've used for forever is the SMART goals. S-M-A-R-T. Anybody know this one? Where you look at something, a couple of you do. You might write this down if you want, just so you know that your goals are specific. Okay? Hey, we're going to Mexico. What are our specific goals? We want students to have a better understanding of service. We want them to have an awareness of other economic environments. We want them to return with a deeper love for Jesus. Is it specific? Yeah. What is your specific goal of your Wednesday night program? What's your specific goal of your Sunday? When you go on a camp, what's your goals? The M in SMART, is it measurable? Okay? No, we can measure this by conversations or parents' observations or a lifestyle change. Is it A in SMART? Is it appropriate to the ministry? For example, our Mexico trip. You know, going to Mexico, is that appropriate for teenagers? Yeah, that's a realistic hour-and-a-half drive down the freeway to go into a foreign country. We're not asking them to go to Bolivia or something like that to raise, money for nuclear arsenals or anything like that. This is appropriate to the ministry. The R, is it realistic? Are goals realistic? They can be specific, but they may not be realistic. You need to ask that too. And then the T is timely. Is there a date of accountability? Can you see the impact? And good programs require, in my opinion, they require a lot of thought. Good programs require a ton of decisions. You've got to clarify where you're going to meet. Do we have any resources available? Physical resources like room and computers and other things. Financial resources. There's publicity and marketing, communicating to the church body, et cetera, et cetera. My personal style when it comes to programs is I don't like to promote the program as much as I like to promote the purpose. Okay? Because if programs change, you want kids to be committed to the biblical purposes, not to the programs. Let me give you an example. If I give you a purpose statement, here's our youth ministry purpose statement at Saddleback. If you look at the purpose statement, is our youth ministry exists to reach non-believing students, to connect them, to grow them in their faith, to challenge them to discover their ministry and honor God with their life. I've highlighted the 5 biblical purposes: reach as evangelism, connect as fellowship, grow as discipleship, discover as ministry, honor as worship. I'm not using program names. So we're not saying our youth ministry exists to have a weekend worship service, to have area Bible study small groups, to do the discipleship habits, to discover their shape and get into ministry. And you see what I'm saying? Because we may not do a weekend worship service next year. We may not do a small group. Andy, I'm laughing at you because you're holding up some time thing that I would have to be Superman to read it. All it looks like is yellow paper to me. Yeah, 5. Thank you. I got a clock right here, but thank you, though. Just yellow paper. It looked nice, though. I put in your notes there a couple tips about the purpose statement. Purpose statement should be simple, meaningful, action-oriented. You can see why these are verbs: reach, connect, grow, discover, honor. Those are all verbs. Action, compelling. You can read the other things in your notebook. So it needs a strategy. And the final foundation that I want to look at, the 7th one, is constant evaluation. What is our evaluation process? That if you're going to build a healthy youth ministry, you have to evaluate it. And there are several ways to evaluate it. Don't fear evaluation. You might write these down. Ask for it. Okay? Be asking for evaluation. Don't be afraid of it. When you ask for it, second, don't defend it immediately. So you ask somebody, hey, so what'd you think? Well, I didn't like, don't defend it, just listen. Okay? Embrace it instead of hide from it. You can learn through all kinds of evaluation. Appreciate it. Okay? Learn from it. off to the side, it's not on PowerPoint, but you might even write these words, do I see ... Okay? When I look at our ministry, I say, do I see evangelism? Do I see true biblical fellowship? Do I see discipleship? We're growing students so they can have a foundation beyond when they graduate. Do I see worship? Those are good evaluation questions, as opposed to most churches evaluate with 3 B's: bodies, budgets, and buildings. Okay? Most of your bosses, that's how they evaluate. Bodies, are people coming? Budget, are they losing money? Buildings, how is it affecting our church? Okay? Those aren't healthy ways to evaluate, but unfortunately, some of our churches have secular people who they're Christian people, but they live in the secular world, so they take their secular standards and they move them into a sacred place like the church, and they think that's how we evaluate that in the marketplace, so let's evaluate that way in the world. In your notes, I put a couple examples, 4 questions to evaluate your ministry, what you might evaluate weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly. You can read those on your own. Let me end by saying this. Look up here just for a second. In the 7 foundations that I'm talking about, please don't feel guilty if you're going, we've only got 2 of them. Okay? That's not the goal, to make anybody feel guilty. The goal is to step back and say, okay, those would make a healthy youth ministry. Now let's go after them. See, when I teach purpose-driven youth ministry and I talk about the 5 biblical purposes of evangelism, fellowship, discipleship, ministry, and worship, there are times when I say, you know what, you might want to start those one at a time. Have a year where you focus on evangelism. Have a year when you focus on fellowship. Have a year when you What I'm talking about with these 7, I wouldn't do it that way. I would focus on all of them all at the same time. I would write them out almost like this is our roadmap and go, okay, am I the right leader? Are we identifying needs? Are we evaluating? Do we have a plan for developing leaders? Keep this list in front of you. And friends, don't be so prideful to not allow somebody else to come in and look at your ministry. Okay? When Jim gave an illustration of reading my book, Purpose-Driven Youth Ministry, when it was just in the written, computer form. Why? Why did I want him to read it? Because I was so close to it that sometimes I can't see. Okay? That I've been working on this chapter for a month, and I know every word, I know every paragraph, and I know every illustration. Now all of a sudden, somebody with fresh eyes comes in and sees and goes, oh, well, this should go here, and this didn't make sense, and you were unclear about this. And the same thing is true with your ministry. You're bleeding for it, you love it, but invite somebody in from the outside to just ask some questions. Let them think they're a consultant. Just say, hey, help me. Because they might have fresh eyes to see what you can't see. But it's possible to build a healthy youth ministry. It's just not possible to do it quickly. Okay? You can do flash quickly. You can throw money at pizza and a band and get kids to show up. You can't build health quickly. You got to figure out what are the essentials and then go after the essentials. Like I said, I gave you 7. There's probably more, but these are the ones that in my experience, that I've gone after, and Jim has stacked hands on this as well, that we wanted to throw at you, not only for your own youth ministry, but as you teach this to others.